Hi, my name is Aaron Fender, and I believe the future of hospitality is atomic.
Hey, what's going on, family? Welcome back to Tools for Time Traveling, the podcast equipping creatives to build the future today. I'm Gavin Guidry, creative director and director of the Portrait Coffee Kickstarter video. Des, what's up?
Hey, what's going on? I'm Desmond Dickerson, marketer, strategist, strategic foresight practitioner, and today interviewer. We're excited to interview Aaron Fender. He is the co-founder of Portrait Coffee, based here in Atlanta. It's fantastic to have you on the show today, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we're all good friends. Living in and around the west end of Atlanta. So really excited to have this conversation. And so you say the future of hospitality is atomic. I can't wait to jump into a little bit more of what that means, especially that atomic word. Would love for you to explain that a little bit more. But before we get into that, can you just tell the audience, what makes you qualified to make that statement? Who are you and what is it that you do?
Yeah, I think the nature of being qualified to make that statement is ironic just in that. So we've been doing Portrait Coffee since December of 2019, but it wasn't until August of 2023 that we actually opened our brick and mortar retail cafe. In the meantime, there's a long story there, but we were roasting coffee, the pandemic, all that stuff. The interesting thing about opening our first brick and mortar was I actually realized it was up to the community to validate our space. Like if it was a public space, if it was a safe space, if it was a third space. So I think it's been building trust with our community has been a way that I've been able to learn and get feedback and understand what our neighborhood's actually looking for when it comes to hospitality.
I love that. And can you just explain to what exactly do you mean by atomic? Just in case the audience isn't familiar with the form of that word that you're using.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context in which I'm saying it is, I just firmly believe that hospitality is all about community. You can't have hospitality without community. And I believe that genuine community is hospitality. So I think the two words are interchangeable. And I think, just thinking about what does that look like? An interesting thing about atoms that builds molecules, that builds materials that we're all familiar with. Let's take, for example, a diamond. Atoms have to share electrons in order to build structures upon one another. And so it's this constant sharing and contribution, people chipping in, atoms sharing electrons that actually build structures that we're familiar with. And I think hospitality is much of the same thing. It's going to take each one of us contributing, sharing our experiences, our journeys, our backgrounds, whatever, in order to build a hospitable, enjoyable environment that we all celebrate and cherish.
I love that.
All right, wow.
I love that.
So
hospitality is community. Community is hospitality. I love that.
Yeah, Portrait Coffee. Come for the coffee, stay for the molecular chemistry lesson.
I did. I had to go on YouTube, and I'm not even sure I explained it exactly right. But I was like, let me make sure I understand what an atom is real quick.
That sounds exactly right. Yeah. So speaking of that, clearly we know you were a scholar in your science classes, but outside of that, what training has been most important to you, or maybe in conjunction with that, what training has been most important to you in developing your expertise and your creative voice?
Yeah. So as far as training goes, when I was in college, I was a psychology major, and coinciding doing that, I was a barista at a local cafe, and so it would be interesting to sit in the sociology and psychology classes, learning about how humans interact, how we're not just individual people, but we're made up of the experiences and the context and the culture and all these things. That's the anthropology of it all. That's who we are. And then to actually observe and experience it in a third space like a cafe And so I think I like as far as training, it was like that hands-on experience of learning something and then seeing it in real life. And then I in college, through that cafe experience, I just got an itch for hospitality. And then later in my career, had an opportunity to work in different hospitality spaces. So most notably, I worked at this co-working company called Industrious for a couple of years, and
Yeah.
that was an environment where I got a lot of the structure and systems that really helped me build what Portrait is today.
Yeah. I think something that like people who don't know you who are tuning in to this also don't know is that like Aaron is just like the people person of all people persons. Like he never met a stranger, like very like our friendship started like he's just able to go like in depth with someone like very quickly but also very genuinely, which I think is like a credit to you, but also like probably has something to do with all of this hospitality as well. So just I feel like that's also very much a part of your expertise, is just like how personable and like genuinely personable you are, I would say. um and so with that, I feel like you started Portrait Coffee and you run the day to day, right? And so like you might not consider yourself creative necessarily, but I think a lot of the ways that you have to solve problems, you have to put new things on the menu, you have to run your staff, involves a lot of creativity. What's your process, would you say, for sparking that creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. I've been a full-time entrepreneur now for about 5 years, and I would say I haven't always been the best at protecting what that spark looks like or what that means for me. And I think I've had to realize like how do I find that spark for myself? And I would say the number one way for me is through education. So it's through reading, classrooms. I love art, so like films. These are like all different ways that I remember one time I went and saw whatever like the Ryan Johnson Star Wars film, the eighth one. And for those of you who
Mm-hmm.
don't know, is this director Ryan Johnson basically made a Star Wars movie that rejected the entire filmography of Star Wars and the entire lore. And he basically said anyone can be a Jedi. Like that was kind of the theme of the film. And I remember coming out of the film, I went and saw it by myself. I love seeing mid-afternoon movies by myself. It's like my thing. And so I came
Yeah.
home and I told my partner, I said, I just saw the most inspiring film of the year. I said, this guy literally, he took the entire world, the entire lore. George Lucas, like he took maybe the most influential director of the last like whatever 40 years. He took it all, scrapped it, and said, "No, anyone can do this." And she stared at me and said, "She said, call Marcus or Gavin. It's not for me." But that was a real spark for me. It was a real moment of
Yeah.
being like, "Wow, I connect with this idea that Ryan Johnson, like that was so innovative." He said, "Forget it." He said, "I don't care if you gave me the most important film franchise of a century. Like I'm good at tell my own story." So I think it's
That's
it's
awesome.
um allowing myself to be excited about things like that, right? And
Yeah.
allowing that to be a genuine spark, but then just also acknowledging, yeah, I mean, I guess it is for me. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, no, 100%, 100%. And I also read your article about your parallel play column, and you were talking about design thinking and how that's starting to play a role in your business, but also I would imagine that has a role to play in some of your creativity now as well, right?
yeah, absolutely. We were doing a little ideation exercise in a group chat like literally 20 minutes ago. But I think human-centered design has been so helpful for our business, just allowing us a lot more freedom, flexibility, and just like openness to failure and trying to create whatever is next for Portrait. And so, and it's also been like super inviting as well, like for our entire team. And so whether it's Record Bar or Saturday School or the next project that we're working on at Portrait, we're really allowing ourselves to take a step back from whatever our desires are for the business and allow our customers and our supporters to tell us like what are they feeling, like what are they thinking, what do they
Yeah.
need, and then creating around that. And so I think the method or the philosophy of design thinking has been a really amazing tool and structure for someone like myself, who, like you said, I don't wake up every day and say, I'm a creator, but that framework has allowed me to have like a philosophy to think through challenges at work.
And you mentioned this before, but I think it'd be really helpful for everybody to get a little bit more of an understanding about how this like hospitality is sort of like coming to life. Could you explain some of the things like Record Bar or Saturday School or any of like the cupping sessions and things like that that you do, just to give like a little bit of an understanding of like what hospitality and that sort of like culture living out looks like?
Yeah, so one of our core values is building community, specifically in the neighborhood in which we live, the historic West End. And so, as we were getting ready to open the cafe, we just kind of had this ideation session of asking ourselves, like, what would it look like to, what kind of events would foster and build community in our neighborhood? And so, basically we would just say, hey, look, like let's come up with these ideas, like let's treat them as experiments, right? It's a Record Bar. One of our team members, Christine, was like, oh, like I've seen this experience where people bring in their records and like share stories of their favorite tracks on the records and play them, and we were like, oh, like I have a record player at my house. Marcus has some speakers, like we can bring them in. That's like a low cost, easy effort experiment. Like, let's see if we say, hey, we're hosting Record Bar, how many people show up?
Yeah.
And we can iterate on that, right? Like we can have name tags and emoji stickers and all these like connection points for people to talk about the records. We can create playlists of all the records people brought and share them through our social media, right? So these were all
Yeah.
ideas that came from an experiment. So then it's like, oh, and it resonated, right? So yeah, literally today, Thursday, we just hosted another one. And it's really cool seeing regulars show up super excited with their bag and the records, and like they always have a story to tell us about them. Same thing with Saturday School. Saturday School was basically us taking a step back and saying, like, how does Portrait want to express coffee education? Specialty coffee is something that can be very bougie, um, very specific, very gatekeepy. Like it can be very ick. And we wanted to create an environment where no question was a dumb question, and that everyone was invited to the table to taste and talk about coffee. So that was the genesis of it, right? And Saturday School is this concept we're all kind of familiar with. And so, same thing, we just kept experimenting with it. The first couple were like different versions of tasting coffees or coffee pairings, so like taste a blueberry, then sip this Ethiopian coffee and see what flavor associations happen in your brain. And then we allowed ourselves to ask ourselves, like, well, what else would our customers be interested in? So, like for example, we did a non-alcoholic beverage tasting, which was really cool. We did a tea tasting. We've invited other coffee roasters into our space to highlight their coffees and their stories as well. So a lot of the programming that we're starting to build at Portrait again is just um, an attempt to be human centered and hear from our customers, like, what do you want and how can we best serve you?
So speaking of like ideation and sparking ideas, so when I pulled up the portrait, you all had like a latte on the menu, and it was like a flower PT latte or something like that, and it was exquisite. And when the person working there like suggested it, I was like, oh, like this isn't just community; these are really creative people to have thought to bring these ideas together. So with that, how does or what role does creativity play for you in being a small business owner?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential, right? Specialty coffee is a really crowded market. If we go down Memorial Drive, I mean, you could throw rock and hit 10 coffee shops. So I think it's an essential question to ask. Why should people come and support your business versus the other 10 amazing specialty coffee shops in the neighborhood? And so I think there's a lot of ways to think through that challenge. Sometimes it is coming up with creative recipes. Sometimes it is connecting those recipes to culture and having references that we all commonly understand and can get excited about. Sometimes it's the answer is education. Um, so yeah, I think we're realizing that there's like not a monolith for solving these problems, but I think the more inputs we have, the more culture we're digesting, the more experiences we're having tasting coffees, exploring Atlanta, exploring the country, the more outputs we're going to have. Like, so for at Portrait, I'm sorry if this is directly answering your question. One thing that we commonly practice is like I'm not looking at the coffee shop to my left or my right for inspiration or innovation. Like I'm really curious about what is Jarrett doing at Little Bear? What is Sarah Pierre doing at Three Parks Wine Shop? What is Yaron and Sean doing at Halfway Crooks Brewery? So like looking at adjacent fields to
Mm.
understand like where are they seeing innovation? Like where are they really connecting with their customers? What kind of hospitality experience are they providing that like I might not be seeing in my field? And that's allowed us like a lot of freedom and flexibility in how we see the world.
A question that we ask like all of our guests, would love to hear your take on this. What's your creative ethos, or like your creative philosophy, or just your philosophy as a person?
I would say probably we were all made to create culture and add joy to this world, and so for me that expression is through hospitality. And probably like the number one question that is always like floating around in my head is just who's behind the camera. Like again, going back to
Mm.
like that film analogy or metaphor. I love hearing how directors think through specific shots, or like what were they trying to convey through a certain perspective or certain lens, or a certain color palette. And I think a lot of times too, when it comes to us being creatives, I love hearing the story behind like, hey, how did you come up with that project, or like why did you take this perspective on something? And I think the answers to those questions can really help inform um, how we move forward. Like what the takeaways from that help us inform how we might build in the future. So
Awesome.
Got it. Okay. And so, the whole theme today is that the future of hospitality is atomic, and you wanted to explain that a little bit, the scientific side. But we'd love to hear more about like how does this manifest? This concept of the future of hospitality is atomic. What does that look like in practice?
yeah, that's a great question. I think I started to reflect on this when I thought about some of my favorite spaces in Atlanta and why they're my favorite spaces, and like what contributing factors are there, and as well as, I mean, the last couple of years specifically here in Atlanta, we've seen so many amazing small businesses close or have to restructure, and
Yep.
it's like can be a very painful experience for a lot of individuals here in the city. And so I just took some time to reflect and ask myself like, okay, well, is this problem solvable, and what are the stakes here, and like how can we potentially solve that? And I think it starts really really small. I think Atlanta is a victim of hyper growth. We have so much movement happening, so much construction happening, so much quote unquote growth happening. um, and I think myself included, a lot of us are caught going like this, shaking our heads left and right, trying to keep up with all of
Mm-hmm.
the change in the city. But I think we take for granted uh, our mom and pop brick and mortar, or the staple restaurant that's been in the neighborhood for 10 years, faithfully serving and building like for the past decade. And I think there's two sides of this conversation. I think for the consumer of hospitality, there's a call to action that is, I don't like, for example, like I'm the operator of Portrait Coffee. I'm not saying you have to come to Portrait Coffee. I'm saying like pick your coffee shop and ride or die
Mm.
with that coffee shop. Just like pick one. Like and you can have a second one that like you visit when you're in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
but pick one and be faithful and loyal to it. Be a regular. Like it's funny. The other day I had someone like ask me a question like, "Hey, how do they know you here at the restaurant that we were at together?" And I looked at them and I laughed. I'm like, "Well, because I come here all the time. Because I'm a regular. Because I'm
Yeah.
invested. I'm invested in the work that these people are doing, and I show up and spend my money here because I want to see them continue to exist." I think that's when I'm saying atomic. I'm like, no, it starts with you as the individual. Like you have to be a part of building bonds to see the hospitality experience you want to have in your city. Something I love about Atlanta is like we're all very quick to take ownership over our city, right? And we speak about it with a ton of pride. And it's like, well, I mean, if you want to have these amazing hospitality experiences, you probably have to participate in them faithfully, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about like other third spaces, I mean, like this is a core concept of something like a church, right? A church has a very, very specific structure in how it's maintained, and like what membership looks like and what financial commitment looks like to it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think for hospitality spaces that are going through such a tough time right now, that level of commitment is necessary in order to see the type of joyful experiences we want to have.
Yeah. That I love that explanation. Like me and my wife Liz, we call it like a cheers place. Like, what's your cheers place? Like where everybody knows your name, basically. And it's funny because like hanging out in Atlanta with Aaron is like he's always like, oh hey so and so, oh what's going on? How's your kid? How's this person? Like knowing everybody by name. It's just so funny. I'm just like, how do you like also know this person who runs this thing? And but yeah, I think it's like it's totally like creating those bonds like you were talking about. I think it's interesting too, like one of the quotes and that you gave before this interview, you were saying that for any small business to survive and thrive in the next iteration of culture, they have to make memorable linking experiences to foster and build community. So it's almost like that term atomic definitely means creating those bonds, but also maybe like atomic, like small, like going from, I feel like maybe the last iteration of culture or society was about going like as big as you can, you know, bringing it to coffee, being a Starbucks or being a Dunkin' or being a, you know, whatever it may be. And now that success is found by like going as small as you can. Seems to be sort of like a secret sauce.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one thing I was sharing with a close friend who operates a business in Colombia, he's a coffee exporter. We were talking, and I was like, you know, I really do think the future of small business is digging instead of scaling. So, what does it look like? Like you're saying, how deep and how far can we go on building meaningful relationships in our community instead of it the problem is this works for the 1%, but it really doesn't work for the other 99% of the world, which is this like obsession with scaling, right? Like there's some virtue to some parts of scaling, but your local amazing, maybe Michelin rated restaurant, most likely it was not made to scale. Like the very same things that make it so meaningful and so joyful and just like an awesome experiences are the very same things that like probably were never made to scale. And so I think you're absolutely right, Gavin. Like the other part of that is to be atomic, is to be mindful, it is to be intentional, it is to like see eye to eye and actually get back to building relationships where, like you said, cheers. It's like, I want to be seen. I want to be a regular. I want people to know my name. I want to be invested in what is happening here. I do think that is the future of hospitality for the small business owner.
Awesome. The conversation, the way you're taking it in terms of like, hey, pick your coffee shop and you just like ride or die with them. Maybe it's just like a sign of the times, but it's reminding me of a lot of the discourse going on right now in like hip hop, right? Like there's, you know, the big three, right? You got Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and J. Cole. And it's like part of the discourse that I'm noticing is whoever you ride with, that's who you think is doing the best, right? And it's like people kind of rationalize why the other two, like, oh, that was trash, oh, that was whack. Like, nah, my guy is the one that's killing it. And it just makes me laugh and wonder, like, what if that same energy was applied? Like, oh, if you're not coming to Portrait Coffee, like, oh, like this other coffee, like it's subpar. What are you doing?
I get offended when my friends haven't like heard or been to Portrait. I'm like what are you doing? What are you doing?
Well, and obviously, yes, I appreciate it, but I mean, I'm always reflecting on my contemporaries. So, for example, Chrome Yellow, super popular coffee shop off of Edgewood. And the amazing thing about it, it's like it's been there for almost a decade. And I mean, if you go in there, I mean, just about every customer there, if you just walk in and observe from like 9 to 10:30, the amount of like regulars and the culture of hospitality that they built and like camaraderie of this is our coffee shop in this neighborhood is really cool and it's really special. And it's really what I'm talking about, it's like, it doesn't have to be Portrait, but it's like, no, like if you don't stop going to Chrome to go to Portrait. That's really what I'm saying. I think that's really what I'm touching on. Atlanta is such a city, it can be a city of fads. And we're all looking for the next hot thing. And it's like, well, do you understand the economic impact of your decision making here? Like if you're going to one place consistently for 6 months and then one day you're just like, this is old news, I mean, that has a tangible effect on our ecosystem. And I think realizing that or digesting that matters,
Totally.
So you're taking the J. Cole approach here. You want everybody to win. No, I'm messing with you.
You got me. Yeah, sometimes you just gotta bow and say, y'all got it.
Yeah. Nice. I love that. So like as futurists, and I don't say that exclusively, we can all and are all futurists. What we do a thing called like signal scanning or signal collecting. Shameless plug for our newsletter. Sign up. It's called Signal Scan. Get a bunch of cool signals that are signaling the future. Anyways, we do this thing called signal scanning or signal collecting, where we're basically taking signals from things that are happening in the world, in literature and economics, and whatever, all of these different places, and figure and seeing what they're saying about the future, so that we can use that almost like a roadmap. So what are the signals of today that make you feel that the future of hospitality is atomic? And is there anyone that's like already doing this really well? Besides Portrait Coffee, of course.
Yeah, the problem with sharing who I think is doing it really well is that I'm selfish and I don't want to be able to not get a seat at the places I like to go to. But that's not totally true. I think the example that comes to mind for me is Kara and Chef Smith, who own and operate Staple House. This is like, I still think the best hidden gem in Atlanta. The fun fact is it's really not a hidden gem. This is like a former Michelin rated restaurant. I mean, just the quintessential fine dining during the pandemic. They totally pivoted their concept. They went to like more of a open market where you can grab a sandwich, you grab a pizza. I mean, all artistically, amazingly made. Grab a bottle of wine, sit on the patio, hang out. But the level of detail and intentionality they have to each and every person that walks in the door is, I've never seen anything like it. And the level of relationship and people I've met there, and like, I hate the networking that's happened there is sensational. And I mean, it's an extremely painful thing to have to pivot your business on the fly. And there's probably a lot I don't understand about their business, but observing that has just been really inspirational for me.
Would you say that that's like a signal of like maybe these Michelin, and it's Michelin, not Michelin? Am I basic for saying Michelin to this point?
So am I, because I've been saying it wrong all my life.
No. It could be me, because the other day someone corrected me and I was like, I don't know
Okay.
why I started saying that. I don't know. It could be.
Well,
I don't know.
we've established Michelin, and it sounds fancier. So, but yeah,
It does sound distinguished.
is
Yes.
is that a signal that you're seeing? I guess maybe like some of those like big like renowned restaurants pivoting to doing something a little bit more atomic.
Yeah, a signal I'm seeing. I mean, you could just pull up Eater, but if the more I keep seeing these concepts close that had probably 10 times the level of investment or infrastructure that something like our first cafe did, but it's unsustainable. Like there you have
Yeah.
to hit such a high level of revenue um, to maintain that. And how do you justify that level of revenue without being the new flashy thing on the street, right? I mean, how how long can you be the new flashy thing for? So I think in certain neighborhoods, that concept works like in parts of Buckhead, right? Obviously, you have restaurants that have 200 seats, and you're like, how does this work? But I mean, it does because the socioeconomics of that part of town. But for some of the neighborhoods we live in, yes, I think if you're going to open a restaurant or open a concept, it has to be atomic in scope. So just well thought out. Like how did what's the lowest level of this and what's the highest level of this? Like what's the flexibility I have there? And then two, like what is my ability to reach and touch my customers so that we can build meaningful bonds and relationships so that over time we might continue to stack bonds where we are a diamond, right? Like, because that's the hope for any genuine hospitality business is that all these bonds would coalesce in complexity where we're
Mhm.
looking at a diamond one day.
So, what would you say this future, right? Seeing it come to fruition, this future and vision that you have for hospitality, what does this future mean for creatives and for small business owners? Like, how could it be? How might it be game changing for them, or like, what will be the direct results of this future kind of playing out?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the beginning of this conversation. I think these meaningful experiences can provide the spark for creativity, for flourishing, for joy, for hope that continue to push the creative forward. So like I think all throughout history we see these third spaces that artists, creatives coalesce around where there are sources of inspiration, there are sources of joy
Yeah,
in pushing the future forward. So I think it's
yeah,
imperative for the creative to be a part of the conversation I'm talking about here.
got it. Okay, yeah. At the time of the recording of this episode, Rico Wade, a legendary producer and co-founder of Organized Noise in Atlanta, recently passed, and I think so much about like the dungeon, which is where they
Mhm.
recorded, like what they ended up calling the place that they recorded. So you got Outkast, Goody Mob, so CeeLo Green is a part of that, Sleepy Brown, all these amazing musicians, like just kind of coming together, and you have that creative friction that comes about when you have all these like dope creatives around
Yeah.
you. You're gonna rise to the occasion. You're gonna get like better input, and you're just gonna create more than you would get in a vacuum.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like just flashing back to our episode with King Williams where he was talking about the benefits of knowing the directions of your city so that you're able to
Mm,
move around and create those, to use Aaron's science analogy, those bonds, like those electromagnetic
yeah,
bonds, like you can
yeah,
only create if you're actually out there sort of like rubbing up against one another. It's not going to happen if you don't do that. So yeah, I love that. And then how can creatives, small business owners, whoever they may be, start incorporating atomic habits into their creative practices?
That um, that is a great question, and I try and live and work by this quote, and it says, "Doing ordinary things extraordinarily well and consistently for a long period of time creates miracles." And I think
Mm,
what we've been talking about here, I think the modern concept of hospitality can and should look like a miracle. And I think it looks
mm,
like doing ordinary things extraordinarily well over a long period of time, being faithful to whatever it is you're doing, whether it's, like I said, visiting your favorite spot or continuing to build on this, whatever project you're working on, or being consistent in shooting with your camera, like whatever it is. Like, I think that commitment to consistency and doing things well over a long period of time, like that's where miracles are created.
I like that. And then you've also talked about it, a few minutes ago, but just like starting with the human, like starting with the people first. Like definitely like feels like an atomic habit, right? That people can incorporate into their processes as well.
Yep.
So another question for you. So like, getting into the future, what one thing of like bringing a future to reality is trying to nail down like what are the advancements, either technological or cultural, that need to occur for that near future to be able to happen. So if the future is going to be this place where everything is atomic, and there's all of these bonds being created between people, and there's just great hospitality is running over, like what are the technological, or maybe more importantly in this case, cultural advancements advancements or just changes in general that would need to occur in order for that to happen?
Great question. As far as technology, I mean, it is kind of trade specific, but I think like let's talk about, so coffee. I'm in a very specialty luxury field of coffee, and pushback for this field can be, let's not embrace some parts of technology, some parts of innovation, because with too much innovation, too much technology, we're taking all the craft out of our coffee. I On some level, I disagree, because again, my point is, if I can allow the technology to assist me with the craft side of it, it gives me more time to speak with you, to be intentional with you, to listen to you. Um, I was talking to someone who's a personal trainer for professional athletes today, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey, can you like share with me what do you think makes you successful in your role?" Like, he's had the opportunity to work with several professional teams, and he called it emotional fitness. He said anyone can rehab a knee, but he was like, my ability to connect with athletes, my ability to hold a conversation, to like check in on their whole person, he was like, that's always been a differentiating factor. And he just told me, he was like, I'm 100% in on investing in your EQ, and I believe the same thing. We have like emotional intelligence, emotional health is of the utmost importance when it comes to what we're talking about here.
So, all right, let's say these things start to change. You start to see this, out in the field, whether it's in specific like communities or specific third spaces or like hospitality businesses. What does your industry look like in 3 years if your prediction of the future really comes true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it in part is the deconstruction of commercialized coffee chains, so Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, whatever. I think the overwhelming positivity in hospitality experience could allow for the flourishing of, like you all said, it's like, I know it's not portrait or bust. Like, there's so much space and so much opportunity for so many businesses, and I think there's a lot of these like second wave businesses that have like kind of
Mm-hmm.
cornered the market on efficiency and like have mediocre hospitality, like take your Applebee's, Chili's, whatever the metaphor is. I think if people double down on hospitality and on these atomic experiences, I think we'll see a lot more flourishing of small businesses and of these experiences that we're talking about here. So really what I'm saying is we'll see a lot less people complaining online about how expensive their bill was and how unimpressed they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah. Okay. So if that's what you feel might happen in another like 3 years, right? That's not too far out. What about a decade? If these behaviors, these outlooks have like really taken root and had like almost a generation to really germinate, like how does maybe business look different? How does the consumer and business experience and relationships start to change in that time frame?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it could lead to a genuine renaissance of food and beverage. So I think that would lead to like innovation in what we digest as food and beverage. Like we will
Mm.
be consuming things we never thought of, right? Because again, all right, look, like we would be out of the phase of surviving and struggling, which is no one talks about it, but that's where food and beverage has been for like the last 15 years, maybe probably longer, right? So like if we could get out of this mindset of surviving and struggling and having like single digit profit margins, and we can actually invest in like what does it look like to innovate, to create, to build on top of what we've already done in the past. I think we'll start to digest things we've never experienced before.
You've given me this definition of like hospitality being from the root of like hospital, right? Like they come from the same root or whatever, and how like, you know, when you're hospitable to people, it's like good for their emotional, maybe even physical health. So like,
Hmm.
you know, we did the exercise of like looking at the like what the industry like food and bev and coffee could look like in 3 years or 10 years, but like what about people, right? Like what about how the people are affected, like people who are going to the record bar, people who are going to Saturday school, people who are coming in the and into the shop, and they're meeting. Like I met Fahamid Peku the other week at the shop, and he's like one of my favorite artists. Like how like what like how can people also like what does their future look like in the next 3 years or 10 years, because hospitality has become atomic at a larger scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it, but I think the end result could just be improved mental and emotional health. The resurrection of the third space being a safe space, being whether like that's a space that we mourn and grieve in, where we celebrate in, where
Mhm.
we just grow in, where we rest in, whatever that might look like. I think that could have very generative benefits on our long term um, health and on our communities.
It feels like one of the kind of bylines or the trend lines through this conversation has just been like, it's essential. Like it really feels like you feel
Yeah.
this is like, oh, this isn't just a future I'm predicting. Like this is critical. It must happen that like we come together more communally, and it starts to manifest whether in like businesses like what you do, but also like just the way we relate to one another in general, like as communal participants.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we touched on it earlier, but like again, what I like so much about that idea of atoms is like an atom by itself can't literally can't do anything. Atoms were made to share electrons, to build
Mm.
molecules, to build these bonds and structures that like our brains couldn't imagine, right? Like the complexity of all these things can only be realized through community, through kinship. And so it's the same thing. Like that's how our communities were meant to be digested and experienced is together, and through the diversity of those experiences too. I don't think I touched on that earlier, but I mean, there's so many different kinds of atoms, and I'm not smart enough to fully understand this, but even different kind of bonds. Like not all bonds are made
Hmm.
equally. Some share electrons, some take electrons, some multiply them, whatever. Like you can keep picking on that metaphor as much as you want, but I think what I'm really getting at there is the diversity of experiences
Yeah.
in us coming together in third spaces allows us to see perspectives on the world that we hadn't
Yeah.
comprehended.
I dig it. I dig it. Last piece on the science part. You're triggering all of my like high school science coursework memories and stuff. But just thinking of like going deeper in this atomic bond concept, like just this concept of covalent bonds, which is when there's like electron pairs are like shared between atoms, and like each additional atom that gets added to that like brings an electron. So now everyone is able to share more, right? So it's like, man, what a future that might be, right? If we're all just kind of linking together, and not in a way where it's like, oh, I had to give up something. It's like, no, because you're linking together, like now you're added to, like you're gaining more from this bond. And for you, like how special that must be to be a catalyst in all this to like be bringing these folks together. What is there a term for that? There's some scientific term when you're like bringing atoms together, I'm sure, and that's what you all are doing.
Yeah.
Robert J. Oppenheimer.
Yes, that's it. Oh man. So yeah, man. Hey, it's been fantastic to have you on with us today, talking not just about what you're doing at Portrait Coffee, but like this, not even creative philosophy, but just like a life philosophy or communal philosophy around, the future of hospitality being atomic, meaning, hey, people are coming together almost on a molecular, individualized level, sharing bonds with one another, and the collective grows stronger because of it. And not just at that atomic level of how people and communities are coming together to bond, but also like at an atomic level in terms of like shrinking things down, being more personalized, having those one-to-one conversation, as opposed to everything being about scale, everything being about like how can we drive up revenue and all that. Folks got to survive, but it does sound like it seems like late stage capitalism may be making some enemies, and folks are starting to look up and realize, hey, there's got to be another way to do it, and this model of community that you're building seems like one of them. Also, good to hear that in terms of you being a creative. The key thing that I pulled from this conversation was that, yeah, it's good to look at, who's doing similar things to you, look for inspiration, but it can be even better when you're looking beyond that, right? Like, what can I learn about coffee brewing and community building from Star Wars or from Jedis? Like, how can they teach me to be better at this? Or how can a wine bar teach me to be better at this? Or even like a, vinyl bar or music listening club, right? So I think that's a key takeaway for all our listeners to take away from us, is that it can be just as valuable for you to be looking in these adjacent places to build up your creative practice. And then the last piece that I think is like just really coming to fruition is just how important community is to, building out your creative practice, right? You need other folks to have like great input, great ideas. You've got a fantastic founding team that folks are learning a ton from. And, you're all kind of just like cross-pollinating in terms of design thinking, human-centered design, and all these ways. And they're all just manifesting in what you're building. And when I went last month, that was my first time in there. And it's a palpable energy. So just to let you know, man, like you are clearly on the right path, and you're doing fantastic work. And I think that much in the same way we were talking about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and how they were coming together at some bar and sharing ideas on the books that they're writing, I think that that's the future of creativity, or the impact that you all will have on the future of creativity is like, hey, 5-10 years from now, this collective of artists will say, oh yeah, we met at Portrait. And now we're all like amazing, fine artists, or we're all filmmakers. And like, this was the genesis of it. So, kudos to you, hats off to what you all are building, and to everyone listening. Like that's the key, is like finding your community, investing in your community, and then, watching your creativity flower because of it.
100%.
Appreciate y'all.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And, hopefully everybody listening in, you can see how, this podcast and these guests and these concepts that we're talking about are also similarly creating bonds and things like that. So, please, if you enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed any of our episodes, please just send us a comment, subscribe wherever you're listening. And then right now, drop what you're doing. Send this to a friend also. And yeah, let's keep building this thing episode by episode, and gear up to build the future that we want to see. All right. Peace, y'all.